The dinner my wife described as boring lasted 5 hours, had a sommelier, and ended with her being introduced to a real estate investor as happily unattached. She told me Thursday morning that it was just a client thing. Her father's quarterly dinner with some of his oldest investors, the kind of gathering that runs long and says nothing. Dry chicken and capital gains talk, she said, smiling over her coffee, like it was already an inconvenience she was generously absorbing on my behalf. You'd want to walk into traffic by the salad course. She was putting on earrings while she said it, the kind that catch light, and her garment bag was already hanging on the closet door. I remember thinking that was a lot of dress for dry chicken. I asked if she wanted me to come anyway. She said, "Babe, seriously, stay home. I'll call when I'm heading back." My wife and I had been together for 4 years, married for 2, long enough that I'd learned her family's grammar. The way her mother's compliments always carried a footnote, the way her brother could make you feel included and invisible at the same time, the way her father shook my hand at every gathering like we were meeting for the first time. I told myself it was their style. Some families run formal, some families just take longer to open up. I had been telling myself this in some form or another for about 3.5 years. I'm 32. I work in commercial insurance underwriting. I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Greensboro with a mother who worked doubles at a hospital and a father who wasn't around enough to have much of an opinion about anything. I didn't have connections or a name that opened rooms. I had a degree I paid for myself and a job I built incrementally and a life I assembled without a blueprint, which I always figured was as respectable a path as any. Her family, the Holloways, figured differently, though they were too polished to say so directly. I understood the shape of it by the second Christmas we spent at their house in Ballantyne. Her mother, who moved through rooms like she was being photographed, had arranged the seating at their holiday dinner so that I ended up at the far end of the table between her father's accountant and a cousin, who spent most of the meal scrolling his phone. My wife sat at the other end, near her mother and her brother and 2 people I'd never met, laughing at something I was too far away to hear. I watched her from down the table and tried to decide whether to be hurt or to be reasonable, and I chose reasonable because reasonable was easier. Later that night, driving home, she said her mother had been overwhelmed with the logistics and the seating just ended up that way. I said, "Sure." There was the anniversary party I found out about 4 days after it happened, when her brother posted photos online. There was the family group chat I was never added to, which I only knew existed because I once watched my wife type a reply to it while we were sitting in the same room. When I asked, she said it was old and she'd forgotten I wasn't in it. I nodded. I folded it away with everything else. I want to be honest about this part. I let it happen, not because I was weak, but because I loved her, and I kept choosing the interpretation that allowed me to keep loving her without friction. Their coldness was sophistication. Their exclusion was just how formal families operated. The gap between where they stood and where I came from wasn't contempt. It was just distance, and distance could close. I believed this the way you believe things you need to believe in order to get through the morning. The night before she left for the dinner, I was sitting on the bed watching her pack, and I noticed she was bringing the heels she'd worn to her family's New Year's event the previous January, shoes she'd bought specifically for that occasion, worn exactly once, and described afterward as too uncomfortable for anything but a real event. She held them up, considered something privately, and set them in the bag. "Those are the New Year's ones," I said. She looked at me. "I know, but they photograph well." I let that sentence sit where she dropped it. She left early the next morning. I made coffee, stood by the window, watched her taillights disappear down the road. February in Charlotte has a particular quality, not dramatic cold, just gray and flat and non-committal, the color of not quite knowing what's coming. I had plans that evening with Marco, a guy I'd known since my first year at the firm. We met at a sports bar in Dilworth. Too many screens, good enough wings, and for a couple of hours I managed to just be a person having a beer on a Thursday. Marco talked about his daughter learning to walk. I talked about nothing in particular. It was the kind of evening where you're grateful for the noise, because the noise makes thinking optional. Then Marco's girlfriend texted him something, and he unlocked his phone to reply, and I picked up mine out of habit, and I saw a news story notification from my sister-in-law, my brother-in-law's girlfriend, who documented every family occasion with the diligence of someone who believed the algorithm required it. I almost didn't open it. I was close to just setting the phone down and ordering another round. I opened it. The video was 16 seconds, shot from across a large room, one of those private event spaces with high ceilings and pendant lights, the kind of venue you rent specifically to make people feel like they're standing inside money. There was a small raised platform at one end, and near it stood my in-laws, all of them, arranged like a family portrait that had come to life. My wife was in a midnight blue dress I had never seen before, and her father was beside her shaking hands with a man in a gray suit, and someone off-camera was speaking in the confident murmur of someone conducting an introduction. Serena is really the face of where we're headed. No distractions, totally focused, very much her own person right now. I turned the volume up to make sure I'd heard correctly. Very much her own person right now. She'd been my wife for 2 years. I set the phone face down on the bar and sat very still for a moment. The game on the nearest screen went to commercial. Someone behind me laughed at something. Marco finished typing and looked up, and something in my expression must have shifted because he said, "You good?" I picked the phone back up and watched it again. My wife was standing 3 feet from where that sentence was being spoken about her. She had a champagne flute in her hand. She was smiling in the direction of the man in the gray suit. She was not correcting anyone. I called her, voicemail on the second ring. I texted, "I just saw something. Call me when you get a chance." I watched the notification change to delivered. I watched it stay there. I told Marco I had to go. He looked at my face and didn't ask questions, which is one of the things I've always valued about him. I drove home the long way without deciding to. The city was doing its usual Thursday night thing around me, restaurants letting out, headlights passing, the ordinary movement of people whose evenings were going normally. Mine had gone somewhere else entirely, and I wasn't sure yet where it had landed. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. I didn't call anyone. I didn't draft a long text demanding an explanation. I didn't post anything. I'm not wired for public outrage, and I've never believed that the best response to being blindsided is to announce it while you're still bleeding. What I did was this. I forwarded the Instagram story to my email. Then I opened my contacts and found the name of a man named Bryce, a commercial real estate contact I'd met through work about 2 years prior, someone I'd built a loose professional rapport with through referrals back and forth. A couple weeks earlier, over lunch, he'd mentioned he was actively looking to place capital with a boutique family real estate firm in the area. He'd said he liked operations that felt personal, family-oriented, trustworthy. I had a feeling I knew which family he was in that room with. I sent him a message, 2 sentences. I told him I understood he might be in conversations with the Holloway Group, and I thought he deserved to know, as a professional courtesy, that I was Serena Holloway's husband, and that the framing he'd encountered at their event tonight didn't reflect an accurate picture of her situation. I attached the video. I signed my name. Then I put my phone on the charger, turned off the lights, and lay on top of the covers in the dark, still dressed, staring at the ceiling. She got home a little after midnight. I heard her heels on the hardwood, that specific sound, the click pause of someone moving carefully, and then they stopped in the hallway. The bedroom was dark. I heard her standing there. I knew she was looking at her phone. She came in without turning on the light, got undressed, got into bed. After a minute, she said, "You texted me." I did. The room was loud. I didn't see it until we were leaving. "Okay," I said. She was quiet then. "Are you upset?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. "I'm something," I said. "We can talk tomorrow." In the morning, she was already downstairs when I came down, standing at the counter with coffee, still in the oversized shirt she slept in. She looked like someone who'd had a night of thinking rather than sleeping. She looked, if I'm being precise, like someone who'd been rehearsing. "Tell me what you saw," she said. I told her all of it. I kept my voice level. I'm good at level. She was quiet through all of it. When I finished, she said, "It's not what it sounds like." "She's not her own person right now," I said. "She has a husband, that's a fact about her." She set her mug down. My dad was pitching the fund. He needed the investors to see the family as available, forward-looking, unencumbered. "Unencumbered," I said. It was his framing. "Were you standing there when someone described you as having no distractions?" The pause before her answer was the answer. "My mother asked me not to make a scene," she said. "She said the meeting was worth too much and that if I..." She stopped. "If you what?" She looked at me the way people look when they're weighing how much of the truth the room can absorb. She said if I complicated things. I set my coffee cup down in the sink. I'm a complication, I said. That's not how That's the word that was used. I know, her voice had gone quiet. I know it is. The refrigerator hummed. Light came in at the low angle February does, thin and honest, not flattering anything. How long? I said. How long have they been doing this? Leaving me out of things on purpose, introducing you as if I don't exist. It's not a coordinated. How long, though? She closed her eyes. Since before we got married. Mom thought it was cleaner for the business relationships. She said I could tell people privately, but that the family's public face needed to be. She stopped again. She was stopping a lot. Unencumbered, I said, finishing it for her. She nodded once. Last question, I said, and I need the honest answer. Did you know before you went last night that they were going to present you that way? That this wasn't a surprise to you? The refrigerator kept humming. Yes, she said. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. She watched me. I'm going to go drive for a bit, I said. We're not finished. I know, but I am for right now. I ended up at a park by the lake, the kind of place that's reliably empty in February. Just geese and gravel and water that doesn't concern itself with anybody's problems. I sat on a bench and let the cold come through my jacket because the cold was at least being straightforward about what it was. I sat there until the feeling in my hands went away, which I took as a kind of marker. My phone rang, my mother-in-law. I let it ring. She called again. I answered. She didn't say hello. She said, "We need to discuss what you've done." Her voice was the kind of control that takes decades to develop. I said, "What have I done?" Bryce Hamill is pulling out of the fund. He sent our attorney a letter this morning, a pause precise as a scalpel. You contacted him. I gave him accurate information. You interfered in a private business matter to cause us harm. Did your family tell investors your daughter was single when she's been married for 2 years? Silence. Because that's a misrepresentation, I said. I corrected it. That's not interference. That's just a fact traveling from one place to another. You did this out of spite. I thought about that. A little maybe, I said, but mostly I did it because I've been a secret for long enough and I decided to stop being one. She made a sound that contained a lot of words she'd decided not to say then. Serena is going to be devastated. She already is, I said. That started before I did anything. I hung up. I want to say I felt righteous. I want to say it felt like something sharp and clean. What it actually felt like was very tired. The particular exhaustion that lives underneath the anger and waits patiently for the anger to run out before announcing itself. I texted my wife, I need a few days. I'm going to stay at Marco's. I'm not making any permanent decisions. I just need some space to think clearly. She replied within a minute, I understand, I'm sorry. I held the phone and sat with that for a while. Sorry is a small word for a large thing, but I knew she meant some of it. That's the part no one tells you about being betrayed by someone you love. They're usually not a villain. They're a person who made a series of choices that accumulated into something that looks, from the outside, like cruelty, but is really something more like kose in a slow drip over many years. That doesn't make it okay. It just makes it complicated, which is its own kind of hard. I spent 4 days at Marco's place, slept on his couch. His daughter, who had recently discovered the comedy of knocking things off low tables, thought I was a reliable audience for this, and I was. There is something genuinely useful about being around a child who has no investment in your emotional crisis. She knocked a wooden block onto the floor and looked at me for a reaction. I gave her one. She laughed. For a moment, the whole morning felt like something that could be survived. On the 5th day, my wife asked if I'd meet her somewhere. I said yes. We sat across from each other at a coffee shop on Central Avenue, her hands wrapped around a cup, my jacket still on because the place was cold near the door. She looked like she hadn't been sleeping, which was accurate, because she later told me she hadn't. My mother tried to call Bryce, she said. He took the meeting out of courtesy and then declined again. She's been telling everyone I should have handled it differently. She said it without self-pity, just flatly, the way you say something you've been processing until it lost its charge. She means I should have managed you differently. That's what handled means, in her language. She's not wrong that you could have handled it differently, I said. No, my wife said. I could have refused to go when I found out what the plan was. I could have stood in that room and corrected them. I could have called you from the car before I walked in and said, I need to tell you what's actually happening tonight. I had about 15 different moments where I could have chosen something else. She looked at me. I chose wrong every single time. I didn't say anything. She wasn't looking for absolution. She was just accounting. I've been trying to figure out when I started thinking that keeping peace with my mother was more important than being honest with you, she said. I think I've been doing it so long I stopped noticing it. That's not an excuse. I'm just trying to explain what happened inside me. I know, I said. I think I've been letting it happen for a long time too. I kept telling myself it was just how they were, that it would eventually change. I was wrong about that. They're not going to change, she said simply. I know that now. I think I've always known it. We didn't solve everything that morning. We agreed to find someone to talk to, a professional, together, and we agreed that some things needed to be named out loud and dealt with directly, and that neither of us could keep operating the way we had been. It wasn't a resolution. It was more like two people deciding to stop pretending they weren't in the middle of something difficult. That was a few months ago now. We're still together. That might surprise some people, and I understand why. But the marriage I have today is different from the one I had before that Thursday, and that difference feels like the only thing that made the last few months survivable. She talks to her mother less. She doesn't attend every event she's summoned to. She doesn't explain herself when she declines. These are small things, but small things are where the actual work of change happens. Not in grand gestures, but in the quiet accumulation of different choices. My mother-in-law and I have a ceasefire. We don't speak directly. At family things, we occupy the same room and acknowledge each other with the bare minimum, and everyone treats this as a new normal, which I suppose it is. I don't expect warmth from her, and she doesn't expect my cooperation, and within those parameters we manage. The Holloway Group eventually placed the fund elsewhere. Business continues. It always does, for people with resources. What I think about when I think about all of it is the version of me that was never going to say anything. The version that absorbed unencumbered the way I'd absorbed every other thing. Folded it into the drawer with the Christmas dinner and the group chat and the anniversary photos. And kept waking up in that house, telling himself that staying quiet was the same thing as keeping peace. That version of me existed for 3 years. I sent a 2-sentence email to a man I barely knew. That's the whole of what I did. And what came back from that 2-sentence email was the truth I'd been arranging my life around not knowing. That I had been a calculation, a liability managed at a distance, a complication in someone else's portfolio. Once you know that, you get to decide what to do with it. You don't have to blow everything up. You don't have to perform your pain for an audience. You just have to stop pretending the thing you now know is something you don't know. That's what I did. That's all I did. The truth doesn't need your help spreading. It just needs you to stop holding the door closed.